Julian Croft believed the world was his chessboard, and he was its undisputed king. His penthouse apartment was a testament to this belief, a sterile sanctuary of glass and steel piercing the clouds, looking down on the lesser mortals of the city below. Every piece of furniture was a statement, every piece of art an investment. His wife, Alara, was the most beautiful piece in his collection. He had acquired her, just as he had acquired his companies, with overwhelming force and a checkbook that knew no limits. Now, 6 months pregnant, she was rounding into a new kind of asset, the mother of his heir, a dynasty secured. He moved through their cavernous living space, the scent of his expensive cologne, a mix of bergamot and boardroom ruthlessness, preceding him. He adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his reflection a sharp, predatory silhouette against the sprawling cityscape. Alara was a ghost in this mausoleum of success, her quiet presence a soft counterpoint to his booming existence. He found her standing by the vast, floor-to-ceiling windows, her hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her stomach. "The Andersons canceled for dinner," he said, his voice clipped, not a question but a declaration. He did not ask why. He did not care. "I'll be late." Closing the Apex deal, he didn't wait for a response, already turning away, his mind on percentage points and leverage. He barely registered the look on her face, a placid mask he had long ago stopped trying to read. It was the face of a perfect wife, beautiful, serene, and blessedly uncomplicated. But the silence that followed his departure was different. It was not the usual hollow emptiness of the penthouse. It was heavy, charged, like the air before a lightning strike. The signs had been there for weeks, subtle tremors beneath the foundation of their life. The late nights, always justified by work. The faint, alien scent of a cloying floral perfume clinging to the cashmere of his coats. The way his phone was always angled away from her, a dark, reflective shield. His condescension had sharpened into a blade, his casual dismissals laced with a new, colder venom. The brewing storm had finally broken an hour before. Julian had left his laptop open on the marble island in the kitchen, a rare slip in his meticulously controlled world. A single email, gleaming on the screen, was all it took. It was from his new protégé, a young, ferociously ambitious woman named Chloe. The words were a monument to his betrayal, outlining plans not just for a weekend tryst, but for a future. Their future. "Once the Apex deal is signed, we can finally drop the pretense," Chloe had written. "Tell her. The timing is perfect. My promotion, the new funding. It's our time. Jay, don't let the unfortunate complication slow us down." An unfortunate complication. Alara's hand trembled as it rested on her belly. The lives, growing inside her. A complication. She clicked, her fingers moving with a numb precision, scrolling through the chain of messages. There were intimate photos, shared jokes at her expense, plans for the company after she was excised from it, and the final, soul-shattering blow, a draft of a press release, prepared by Julian's COO, Marcus Thorne, announcing not a divorce, but an amicable separation, citing Julian's need to focus on his expanding global enterprise. She was being written out of her own life, reduced to a footnote in his triumphant biography. The initial shock was a physical blow, sucking the air from her lungs. The pristine, cold marble of the floor seemed to rise up to meet her. For a moment, she saw the future they had planned for her. The weeping, humiliated wife, cast aside for a younger model, a tragic cliché played out in the gossip columns. She saw herself retreating, broken, a victim of his monumental ego. The vision was so clear, so horrifyingly plausible, that it nauseated her. Then, something kicked. A tiny, insistent flutter from deep within. It was a jolt of life, a fierce, primal reminder of what was at stake. It was not just her future anymore. It was theirs. The sorrow, the white-hot pain of betrayal, did not vanish. Instead, it began to cool, to change its state, solidifying from a liquid grief into something hard and unyielding. It was the pure, clarifying rage of a queen who had just witnessed a traitor plotting in her court. The steel in her spine, a quality she inherited from a long line of resilient women who had weathered far worse storms than this, finally made its presence known. She had been a ghost in this gilded cage for too long. A ghost was about to become a phantom, an avenging spirit. She walked over to her own tablet, her steps now firm, her purpose absolute. She didn't call her mother or a tearful friend. She called Anya, her oldest confidant, a woman whose mind was as sharp and merciless as a litigator's cross-examination. "Anya," she said, her voice devoid of its usual softness, now low and resonant. "I need you to liquidate the portfolio. All of it. And find me a secure workspace. Something off the grid." Her plan began to form, not as a complex web of revenge, but as a single, symbolic act. An act of detonation. She knew Julian's greatest weakness was not his greed or his lust, but his pride. His reputation was the true source of his power. She would not attack his wealth. She would annihilate his myth. And she would do it in his arena, on his terms, in a place where the whole world was watching. The restaurant was called Ethel. It was less a place to eat and more a temple to power, a hushed, brutally exclusive space where deals worth nations were sealed over eye-wateringly expensive plates of food. To get a table was to announce you had arrived. To be seen there was to be anointed. Julian had chosen it to celebrate the closing of his apex deal, the crowning achievement of his career. It was the peak of his mountain, and he was there tonight, holding court. Chloe was beside him, radiant and triumphant, her hand possessively on his arm. Marcus Thorne, his loyal COO, sat opposite, raising a glass of crystal-encased champagne. Julian surveyed the room, a king on his throne. Every glance his way was a tribute. Every hushed whisper was an acknowledgement of his power. He felt invincible, the master of his universe. Then, the universe tilted on its axis. The heavy oak doors of Ethel swung open, and Alara stepped inside. A wave of silence washed over the room, starting from the entrance and spreading like a ripple in a dark pond. She was wearing a simple, sheath-like white dress, a column of pure light in the dim, wood-paneled opulence. She wore no jewelry save for her wedding band. Her hair was pulled back severely, accentuating the stark, regal beauty of her face. She was not a scorned wife. She was a monarch entering a room of conspirators. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability but a statement of regal intent, the promise of a dynasty he was throwing away. Her walk was not a walk. It was a procession. Every eye was locked on her as she moved between the tables, her gaze fixed on one point, her husband. Julian froze, the champagne glass halfway to his lips. A knot of ice formed in his stomach. This was not the weeping, compliant woman he had left in his penthouse. This was a stranger, an apparition of terrifying composure. Chloe's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a sneer of disbelief and annoyance. Alara reached their table and stopped. She did not look at Chloe. She did not look at Marcus. Her eyes, cold and clear as diamonds, were locked on Julian. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried across the stunned silence of the entire restaurant. "Alara," he managed, his own voice a rough, unfamiliar sound. "What are you doing here? This is a private dinner." A humorless smile touched her lips. "I know. I read the invitation. The one you sent from your work email, detailing your plans to celebrate your new life with your new partner," she said, her voice still unnervingly calm. She then turned her head slightly, her gaze finally falling upon Marcus Thorne. "And the one you," Marcus replied to, attaching the draft of the press release about our amicable separation. "Very efficient." Marcus turned a shade of pale gray, his composure shattering like cheap glass. Chloe simply stared, her mouth slightly agape, the architect of a coup suddenly finding herself outmaneuvered. "This is not the time or the place," Julian hissed, trying to reclaim control, his anger warring with a rising tide of panic. "You're right," Alara agreed softly. "It's not. The time and place was our home. The time and place was before you decided our marriage, and our children were an unfortunate complication." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly aimed dart. Julian's face flushed with a mixture of shame and fury. This was his sanctuary, his moment of ultimate triumph, and she was turning it into a public execution. Then came the symbolic detonation. She reached into her small, simple clutch and pulled out not a phone, not a legal document, but a small, unassuming data key, the kind one might attach to a keychain. She placed it gently on the pristine white tablecloth between them. "What is this?" Julian asked, his voice shaking with rage. "That," Elara said, her voice ringing with absolute authority, is the source code for Prometheus, the proprietary algorithm that runs your entire company. The algorithm you built your billion-dollar empire upon. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the table, over the entire listening room. The one I wrote for you, from scratch, as a wedding gift. My gift. The one you filed the patent for under your name alone. Shatter. It was not the sound of glass, but the sound of a myth imploding. The illusion of Julian Croft, the self-made tech titan, the visionary genius, evaporated in an instant. He was a fraud. A thief who had stolen his success from the woman he was now casting aside. The whispers in the room were no longer of admiration, but of shock, of scandal. He was no longer a king. He was a fool. Elara looked at him one last time, at the wreckage of the man who had so thoroughly underestimated her. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a vast, empty finality. She turned, her back straight, and walked out of the restaurant. She did not run. She did not look back. She simply exited, leaving Julian alone in the ruins of his reputation, the data key gleaming on the table like a small, devastating tombstone. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By morning, the story was everywhere. It was not just on gossip blogs, it was in the financial press. The narrative of Julian Croft, the visionary, was dead. In its place was the story of Julian Croft, the user, the cheat. The word character became a weapon used against him. The Apex deal, which contained a stringent character clause for its key principles, collapsed before lunchtime. The stock in Croft Enterprises, built entirely on the myth of Julian's singular genius, went into freefall. Billions in value were wiped out in a matter of hours. The empire he had built with her mind and his ruthlessness began to crumble. The foundations turned to sand. And that was when the viper struck. Marcus Thorne, the loyal COO, the man who had stood by Julian for a decade, revealed his true colors. Using the stock collapse and the public relations disaster as leverage, he initiated a hostile takeover, backed by a consortium of investors who had been waiting for Julian to falter. Chloe, it turned out, was not just a mistress. She was a honey trap, a co-conspirator who had been feeding Marcus information for months. Julian was voted out of his own company in a brutal, swift board meeting. He was exiled. The king, stripped of his crown, his kingdom, and his queen, retreated to his glass and steel penthouse. But it was no longer a castle, it was a prison. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was accusatory. Every reflective surface showed him the face of a failure. Alone in the cavernous space, surrounded by the hollow emblems of a power that was no longer his, he was forced to confront the man he had become, stripped of the shield of his wealth and status. It was an identity he did not recognize, and it terrified him. Meanwhile, Elara did not retreat to a quiet country home. She retreated to a place that represented her true self, a Spartan, clean-tech incubator in a repurposed warehouse district, secured by her friend Anya. The space was bare, smelling of ozone and fresh paint, a blank canvas. Here, surrounded by whiteboards and processing units, she was not a wife or a victim. She was a creator. For months, she worked. The cold, hard resolve that had been forged in the fire of her betrayal was now channeled into pure, focused creation. She was not rebuilding Prometheus. She was building something better, something new, from the ground up. She called it Nyx, named for the primordial goddess of the night. It was an architecture that made Prometheus look like a child's toy. Word of her project, and of her story, traveled through the rarefied air of the global tech community. One day, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was quiet, feminine, and legendary. It belonged to Sybil Reed, a reclusive, almost mythical tech billionaire who had disappeared from public life decades ago. I read about what happened, Mrs. Croft, Sybil said, her voice crackling slightly over the encrypted line. Men like your husband are a plague. Men like Marcus Thorne are a disease. Geniuses like you are the cure. I've seen the schematics for Nyx. My people say it's 20 years ahead of anything else. I'm prepared to back you. Not with millions. With billions. Let's build your empire. Elara did not become a pawn in another person's game. She became a queen with her own grandmaster backing her. Nyx Industries was born, not with a press release, but with the quiet, world-shaking launch of a product that changed everything. While her new empire rose, she gave birth, not to a single heir, but to twins, a boy and a girl. Holding them in her arms, she understood that her fight was not just about vengeance anymore. It was about legacy. It was about building a world for them, a world based on truth and creation, not lies and acquisition. It was through her new, powerful network that she uncovered the full truth. Marcus Thorne was not just staging a coup. He was a corporate parasite. He had been embezzling from Croft Enterprises for years, and his plan was to siphon the remaining valuable patents and run the company into the ground, leaving a worthless husk. Her old life, the legacy that rightfully belonged to her children, was about to be obliterated. She was faced with an impossible choice. Let the company Julian stole from her burn to the ground, taking the traitor Marcus with it, or intervene. Looking at the faces of her children, she knew she could not let their legacy be destroyed by another man's greed. She made another call. Julian was a ghost haunting his former life. He'd sold the penthouse and moved into a small, functional apartment, the kind of place he would have sneered at a year ago. He spent his days in a self-imposed exile, trying to untangle the knots of his own failings. When his phone rang and he saw her name, his heart stopped. "I need to see you," she said. There was no warmth, but no venom either. It was the voice of a CEO. They met on neutral ground, a quiet, oak-paneled library. It was her turf. She was the one with the power now. She laid out the evidence of Marcus's long con, the financial records, the secret offshore accounts. She proposed an alliance, not a reconciliation, a business proposition. "He's destroying your company," she said. "Our children's company. I have the power to stop him. You have the institutional knowledge. I need to do it cleanly. We can take it back." He looked at her, truly saw her, for the first time. The formidable intellect, the strategic mind, the quiet strength that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. He had been so blind. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with a humility he had never known. "Whatever you need." Their war room was a corner of her bustling, vibrant office at Nix Industries. It was a fragile, unspoken partnership. He provided the insider's knowledge of board procedures and Marcus's psychological weaknesses. She provided the overwhelming force. The final showdown was the annual shareholder meeting for what was left of Croft Enterprises. Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, smug and secure in his position. Then Alara walked in, not as Julian's wife, but as the CEO of Nix, flanked by her lawyers and the silent, terrifying proxy of Sybil Reed's immense wealth. She did not shout. She did not accuse. She simply presented the facts. With Julian's intel, she had uncovered irrefutable proof of Marcus's embezzlement, presented in a clear, methodical, and devastating slideshow. Audio recordings, forged documents, traced wire transfers. It was a corporate execution. Marcus was ruined, escorted from the room by security. In the ensuing chaos, Alara made her move. With the backing of Sybil Reed and a coalition of terrified shareholders, Nix Industries didn't just save Croft Enterprises. It acquired it. The power dynamic was not just inverted, it was shattered and remade. Julian's old company was now a subsidiary of hers. The board answered to her. The king was a subject in the queen's new empire. Months later, a new normal had settled. Alara stood in the nursery of her new home, a large, warm, light-filled house, not a sterile penthouse, watching her twins sleep. The door opened softly. It was Julian. He was not there as a husband, but as a father. He was holding a toolkit, his sleeves rolled up. "The railing on the crib was a little loose," he said quietly. "I tightened it." He no longer wore $1,000 suits. He wore jeans and a simple shirt. The arrogance had been burned out of him, replaced by a quiet, searching sadness. He looked at the children, his children, with a reverence that broke her heart a little. They stood in a comfortable silence, the kind that can only exist after the worst storms have passed. He was not living with her. He was visiting, earning his place in their lives one small, simple act of service at a time. "Alara," he said, finally turning to her, his eyes filled with a pain that was no longer about his lost fortune, but about his lost self. "I am so sorry. Not for the money. Not for the company. I am sorry I never saw you. I had a masterpiece in my house, and I was too blind and too arrogant to even look at it." She nodded, accepting the truth in his words. "I know, Julian. I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, his voice cracking. "And I would never ask you to love me again. But I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your respect, and trying to be a father our children can be proud of." She looked from his broken, sincere face to the sleeping forms of her children. The road to redemption was long and difficult, and he was only at the very beginning. But it was a start, a fragile, hopeful beginning, born from the ashes of lies. In the end, this was a story about the true nature of power. It showed that real strength is not found in control or wealth or a name on a building. It's found in the quiet, unbreakable resilience of the human spirit. It's the power of an intellect underestimated, of a love betrayed and transformed into righteous purpose. Redemption isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about becoming worthy of what you hope to build anew. Alara did not just take back an empire. She reclaimed herself, proving that the most formidable force on earth is a woman who has decided she is done being invisible